Hi, welcome to part 2 of lesson 2. We are going to talk about the third perceptual skill. We just finished talking about how the edges and the spaces were something that you need to be able to see, to be able to draw. Well, the third perceptual skill is just as important, and it goes along with those first two. In fact, you can think of them as the three musketeers of drawing. They all belong together and they work together to make a successful drawing. And that third one is called the perception of relationships. Okay, so when we talk about relationships in terms of drawing, what we're talking about is how do all the parts of the object inside the object relate to one another, and how does the object relate to what's around it, right? So how would the object be relating to my hand that's holding it and all the things that you can see immediately around the object? All right, so why don't we look at this object, and we can see that we can start by talking about how the edges, which we already talked about before, how the edges are related to one another. So how are these edges, the top edge and the bottom edge, relating? Well, the relationship of the top and bottom is always changing as you move along the object. So where on this object are the two edges the furthest apart? In the middle, right? Because if you look in the middle, that's where the two edges here and here are the furthest away from each other. As you move along the object, the edges are going to get closer and closer and closer until they finally meet at a point. So all those kind of observations are what you need to do to be able to draw this object. Now let's look over here at the drawing that I made with a rope. So we just finished putting a rectangle around our drawing. I hope you have a rectangle, and I hope you colored in all the sections that are around the object. Now, if you look at the contrast between the rectangle and the object, you're going to see that the edges of the rectangle, their relationship doesn't change compared to each other, because they're always going to be parallel. So they're always the same distance. This one is always the same distance from this one. But our object is going to, those edges are changing. So at some point, do you see how where the edges are further apart, it actually touches the rectangle, but as the edges get closer and closer together, they get further and further away from the rectangle. So those are the kind of relationships and then that we need to observe. Now, if we had drawn this object too skinny, so let me just kind of simulate what that might look like. If we drew the object too skinny, relationships will tell us that something's wrong, because we will see that, and of course we have to pretend that our football actually is in front of a rectangle, which it isn't, but let's just say it was, and we would realize, wait a minute, why is there space here? That's supposed to be touching. That relationship needs to be closer. I've made it too far apart. Does that make sense? So it's relationships are how parts of your object relate to one another and how they relate to what's around it. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Should we stop it? All right, the next one is the perception of light and shadow. You can also say plural. You can say the perception of lights and shadows. And basically, this is sort of a kind of a bonus one, because it basically is just a nice way to make your drawings look three-dimensional. Okay? So, because when we look outside at objects in the natural world, in the real world, they're always catching light, and there's always going to be shadow wherever the light is being blocked. Okay? So, for instance, if light is coming in from above, from the top of this, then the fact that this object is solid is going to keep light from the bottom. It's going to block the light. So the bottom of the object will be in shadow and the top will be in light. Okay? And if we show that on our drawing, it'll make our drawing appear to be volumetric, dimensional, 3D, if you want to call it that. So I'm going to show you how I would put shadow on my object. All right? And how much it changes it. So right now we've got a white object. It's very flat. It could be, you could just cut it out of paper and it would just be flat. We want to give it an illusion that it has three dimensions. So by adding shadows and leaving the lights white, we are going to do that. Now, you might think, oh no, shadows, they're so mysterious, I don't understand them. You actually have already learned how to understand them. All shadows and lights are is spaces or shapes that we've already learned about in number 2, right? So the light is going to make a certain shape on this object. And when it hits the shadow, where that hits, that'll have a relationship, which we just talked about, but the shadow will also make a shape. Those two shapes coming together will make your object look shadowed. So here I'm going to create some shading. I'm doing it upside down so that it will look right to you guys. But I'm going to create some shading on this object to show you how much it adds to it. So basically our brains are trained to see light and shadow all the time, but we never really think about it much. But when you're drawing, you have to think about it because that's your job. Your job is to start to see things in a way you've never seen them before and notice things you've never noticed before. That's going to be your job when you're drawing. All right, so here we have some shadows, and now you can see that this object is starting to look pretty 3D, right? It's going to look a lot more like a real object where light is at the top and there's going to be a shadow strip here. Okay, so that's basically the deal with light and shadows. On a more complicated object, the shadow shapes will be more complicated, but they're really just a bunch of shapes. They're just a bunch of shapes. There's nothing to be worried about, and we're gonna learn how to do them one step at a time. Okay, the very last one is the perception of the whole. Okay, so this is number 5, the perception of the whole. And what that basically means is, does your whole drawing come together to look just like the whole object? In other words, are there any little parts that are maybe off that are going to make it not look like this object? Okay, so the way I like to check if my whole drawing and my whole object match is by doing something called the eyeball bounce. Okay, sounds like the latest dance craze. Well, it isn't. The eyeball bounce is when you look up at the object, down at your drawing, up at the object, down at your drawing, back and forth, you bounce your eyeballs up and down until something will happen. Now, 2 things could happen. 1, everything could match, and then congratulations, you drew it exactly how it really looks. Or something could pop out at you that looks a little bit off, a little bit different. Something on your drawing will look different than something on the object. I'll give you an example. Well, let's just say on our object that we made it too round. Okay, so if I eliminate these points and I make it kind of more look like a lemon or something. Let's see, so it kind of looks more like an oval now. All right, let's just say I made my object too round. Okay, so that's a perception of edges that I might have missed. I missed the edges, I missed how they made a point, okay? All right, so when I look back and forth, if you could do the eyeball bounce right now. Look back and forth from this object to this drawing, this shape. Look back and forth, up and down. Do you see how you can see the difference? You can understand that something's different. Well, it's very, very important that you pay attention to that and don't ignore it and hope that everything's going to be okay. It's not, okay? I mean, it's okay to make a mistake because that's how we learn. But don't ignore the mistake because how are you going to learn if you just ignore the mistake? So when I look back and forth, I go, oh no, something is not right about these edges. Okay, so plus the relationship of it to the square, it's not touching here and here, right? So that relationship is off. So all I have to do to fix it is go like this, and on your drawing, obviously, you would use an eraser. Using an eraser is nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, an eraser is going to be your best friend because it means erasing. Can I just tell you something really quick? I'd rather see a bunch of erase marks on your drawing than have it be just left just alone. Because when people erase, it means they're trying really hard to do it the best they can and to get it better, as opposed to just drawing something quick and saying, here, I hope it's okay, here, I'm turning it in. I'd rather see the struggle. The struggle is real. You heard that expression. Well, I'd like to see the struggle on your paper. I want to see that you tried and then something didn't work and you erased it and you fixed it. And that's okay. So never ever be ashamed of using your eraser. Okay, so now we can look back and forth and we can see that this shape matches this shape back and forth, and everything is cool now. Okay, so that's it. I will be quizzing you on this, so study your 5 perceptual skills, and I'll see you in class.